person you mourned for years suddenly reappeared, a ghost walking in the land of the living. Imagine the shock, the hope, and the terrifying questions that would follow. This is a story about a love that refused to die, and a secret so dark it could destroy everything. Prepare yourself for a journey into a husband's desperate search for the truth, where a 5-year-old mystery is about to unravel in the most heart-stopping way imaginable. Ethan Vance had it all: a brilliant career in Boston's tech scene, a beautiful daughter named Lily, and the memory of a perfect love. His wife Chloe had been the sun in his universe. She was a vibrant, kind soul who he had loved since they were teenagers, a love he had fought for against his own family's wishes. But 5 years ago, that sun was extinguished. A police report, a submerged car, and a missing body led to the devastating conclusion that Chloe was gone forever. Ethan buried an empty casket and tried to piece his life back together, focusing all his energy on their daughter, the last living piece of the woman he adored. He learned to live with the ghost of his past, never knowing that the truth was far more terrifying than her death. The Boston air was crisp on July 2nd, a date seared into Ethan's soul like a brand. 7 years. It would have been their 7th wedding anniversary. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the simple task at hand: buying 6 pink candles for Lily's birthday cake. Their daughter was his anchor in the turbulent sea of his grief. He walked past the gleaming windows of a Whole Foods in the Back Bay neighborhood, his mind a million miles away. Then he saw her, a woman huddled on the cold steps, wrapped in a thin, worn-out coat, her face obscured by a curtain of matted dark hair. There was something in her posture, in the slender line of her shoulders, that made his heart stop dead in his chest. It was a shape he knew as well as his own reflection, a silhouette that haunted his dreams every single night. He slowed his pace, his breath catching in his throat. It couldn't be. He was just tired, his grief playing cruel tricks on him, as it always did on this date. But as he drew closer, the woman shifted, lifting her head slightly. For a split second, her face caught the afternoon light, the familiar curve of her cheekbone, the delicate shape of her lips. A wave of vertigo washed over Ethan, so powerful he had to brace himself against the brick wall. His mind screamed, "Impossible!" Yet his heart whispered a single forbidden word: Chloe. He had to know. He had to be sure, even if it meant confirming his own insanity. Taking a shaky breath, he approached the huddled figure, his world tilting on its axis with every step he took. "Excuse me," he managed, his voice a hoarse croak he barely recognized. Are you okay? Do you need some help?" The woman flinched at the sound of his voice and looked up, and then he saw her eyes, the same deep, soulful hazel eyes that he had fallen in love with in a high school classroom a lifetime ago. They were clouded with fear and confusion, but they were hers. The world around him dissolved into a silent, roaring blur. It was Chloe, older, thinner, marked by a hardship he couldn't comprehend, but it was her, his Chloe, the wife he had mourned, the woman whose funeral he had attended. She was alive, and she was sitting on the steps of a grocery store like a stranger. "Chloe!" he breathed, the name a prayer on his lips. The woman recoiled, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape. "I think you have the wrong person," she said, her voice raspy and unfamiliar, yet the melody beneath it was one he knew by heart. "My name is Julia." She didn't recognize him. The love of his life, his other half, was looking at him with the blank stare of a stranger. The initial shock gave way to a tidal wave of confusion. "No, you don't understand," he stammered, fumbling for his phone. "I'm Ethan, your husband." At the word husband, a flicker of pure terror crossed her face. She scrambled to her feet, ready to bolt. "No! Stay away from me! I don't have a husband!" He knew he was scaring her, but he couldn't let her go. Not again. "Please, just wait," he pleaded, his hands up in a gesture of peace. "I won't hurt you, I promise." He frantically swiped through his photo gallery, his fingers trembling. He found their wedding photo, A sun-drenched image of two happy, ridiculously young people who thought they had forever. He held it out to her. "Look, this is us. This is you." She hesitated, her fearful gaze dropping to the bright screen. She stared at the smiling woman in the white dress, then back at Ethan's desperate face. A storm of emotions seemed to pass through her eyes: disbelief, confusion, and a tiny, fragile spark of something else. That looks like me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It is you, Chloe. We all thought you were dead," Ethan's voice cracked, the years of repressed grief finally breaking through. 5 years! You've been gone for 5 years. Where have you been?" Her face was a mask of bewilderment. 5 years, she echoed, the words seeming to have no meaning to her. It was then that the horrifying truth began to dawn on him. It wasn't just that she was lost, it was that her entire past, their entire life together, had been wiped clean. He was a stranger to her, their daughter was a stranger, their love was a story she had never heard. The woman he loved was trapped inside this frightened shell, and he had no idea how to bring her back. The memory of their first meeting hit him with the force of a physical blow. She had been the new girl at his elite Boston prep school, a scholarship kid named Chloe Miller, thrown into a shark tank of old money and entitlement. While his classmates saw her J.C. Penney blazer and worn-out backpack, Ethan saw a fire in her eyes, an intelligence, and a genuine spirit that made the polished facade of his world feel cheap and hollow. The other kids were merciless. "Did you get lost on your way to public school?" Kyle Spencer, the class kingpin, had sneered on her first day. Ethan had watched, clenching his fist under his desk, his anger at his classmates matched only by his shame at his own silence. Kyle had made it his personal mission to humiliate her, a cruel game that culminated in a bet among the boys. He had wagered $500 that he could make the charity case fall for him in 2 weeks. Ethan overheard their locker room conversation, the casual cruelty of it making him sick. That was the moment his silence broke. He had confronted Kyle, a tense standoff that ended with a threat. "You lay one hand on her, Spencer, and you'll be eating through a straw." The rivalry was born that day, a silent war fought in the privileged halls of their school, with Chloe as the unknowing prize. Ethan knew he had to protect her, even if she never knew why. He remembered the day he finally fought for her. Kyle had cornered Chloe after school, trying to pressure her into his gleaming BMW, a gift from his father. When she refused, his charm turned to menace. Ethan saw it from the school steps and didn't hesitate. The ensuing fistfight was short and brutal, ending with Kyle on the ground with a bloody nose, staring up at Ethan with pure hatred. Ethan had ignored the shocked gasps of his classmates, turned to a stunned Chloe, and said the words that would change their lives. "Let me take you home." In the quiet of his car, under the admiring and hateful glares of their peers, their story truly began. Their love blossomed away from the judgment of the school's social hierarchy. They spent hours exploring Boston, from the cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill to the vibrant chaos of the North End. He fell for her mind, her humour, and her unwavering kindness. She saw past the Vance family name and the trust fund to the real Ethan, the one who dreamed of building things with his hands and felt suffocated by his parents' expectations. His parents, Harrison and Eleanor Vance, were titans of Boston society. They viewed his relationship with Chloe not as love, but as a youthful rebellion, a stain on the family's pristine reputation. They saw a girl with no connections, no pedigree, and no place in their world. He could still feel the chill of the infamous welcome dinner. His parents had invited Chloe to their massive home on Beacon Hill, an event that felt more like an interrogation than a meal. Eleanor had dissected Chloe's life with surgical precision, her questions dripping with condescension. "And what is it your father does, dear?" "Oh, construction." "How?" "Tangible." The final blow came when Eleanor asked about a recent trip to Europe. Chloe, trying to find common ground, mentioned how much she loved Red Lobster's shrimp scampi. Eleanor's fork had frozen mid-air, and she'd exchanged a look with Harrison that was louder than any insult. It was a declaration. This girl will never be one of us. Ethan had stormed out of that dinner, Chloe in tow, and never looked back. His father had delivered the ultimatum. End this foolishness or you are cut off. No tuition, no trust fund, no family name to open doors for you. Ethan's choice was instantaneous. He chose Chloe. He worked 2 jobs while attending Boston University, built a small tech company from his dorm room, and proved them all wrong. They got married on a sunny July day, surrounded by Chloe's warm, loving family and their own circle of friends. His parents were conspicuously absent. But it didn't matter. Holding Chloe's hand, he had never felt richer in his entire life. The birth of their daughter, Lily, had filled their small Cambridge apartment with a joy so profound it felt tangible. Life was perfect. And then, it wasn't. Chloe had been driving to her parents' house, a routine trip, but she never arrived. Days of frantic searching turned into weeks of agonizing silence. The police found her car submerged in the Charles River, but her body was never recovered. The official theory was that she lost control and was swept away by the current. The case was closed. Ethan's world ended. He was left with a 1-year-old daughter and a chasm in his heart so vast he thought it would swallow him whole. Now, standing on a bustling Boston street, that chasm was suddenly filled with a terrifying, unbelievable reality. He convinced Chloe, this lost, frightened Julia, to come with him. He took her to his home, the home they had built together. The shock on her parents' faces when they arrived was a mirror of his own. They rushed to embrace their daughter, but Ethan held them back. She doesn't remember, he explained, the words tasting like ash. She has amnesia. The scene was surreal. Her mother wept. Her father stood in stunned silence, and little Lily, who had been playing on the floor, looked up at the strange woman with wide, curious eyes. "Who's that?" Lily asked, pointing a small finger at Chloe. Ethan knelt beside his daughter, his heart breaking. "Lily, sweetie, this is your mommy." Chloe stared at the little girl, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "A daughter," she whispered, the idea as foreign to her as her own name. "But I don't have children." Lily, with the pure instinct of a child, seemed to understand something the adults couldn't. She walked over to Chloe, reached out, and wrapped her tiny arms around her legs. "Mummy," she said, her voice muffled against the worn fabric of Chloe's coat. "I missed you." For the first time, a tear traced a clean path down Chloe's dirty cheek as she hesitantly rested a hand on the little girl's head. The next few days were a blur of doctors and tests. Physically, Chloe was malnourished but unharmed. Mentally, she was a blank slate. A specialist in dissociative amnesia, a Dr. Anya Sharma, spoke to Ethan in hushed tones in a sterile hospital corridor. "The mind is a powerful thing," she said. "It can wall off trauma so completely that it effectively erases a person's identity to protect them. Something terrible happened to your wife, Mr. Vance. Something she is not ready to face." Ethan felt a cold dread creep up his spine. Her disappearance wasn't an accident. Someone had done this to her. Someone had stolen his wife and her memory. Dr. Sharma suggested a private therapy session with Chloe. Ethan agreed, pacing the waiting room like a caged animal, while the woman he loved recounted 5 years of her life to a stranger. Afterwards, the doctor handed him a flash drive containing a video of the session. "You should see this," she said, her expression grim. "I believe a crime has been committed. I strongly advise you to contact the police." That night, after Chloe and Lily were asleep, Ethan sat alone in his kitchen, the glow of his laptop casting long shadows on the wall. He inserted the flash drive, took a deep breath, and pressed play. He was about to step into the nightmare his wife had been living. On the screen, Chloe, or the woman who called herself Julia, spoke in a flat, emotionless voice. "I woke up in a room I didn't know," she began. "A man was sitting by the bed. He told me his name was David, and he was my husband." She described a life of total isolation. This David told her she'd been in a terrible car accident that had erased her memory. He claimed he was protecting her, keeping her safe at home until she recovered. The house was in a remote suburb, with no neighbours close by. He took her phone, controlled her access to the internet, and never allowed her to leave the house alone. He was her caretaker, her warden, her entire world. "He told me we had no family," Chloe's voice continued on the recording, devoid of emotion. "He said my parents died when I was young, and that I didn't have any friends because I was difficult. He said I was lucky to have him." She explained that nothing ever felt right. He didn't know her favourite colour, or the food she liked. There were no photos of them together, no mementos of a shared life. When she questioned him, he would get angry, telling her the trauma had changed her, that she was ungrateful for all he was doing for her. He never hit her, but his words were a constant corrosive poison, eroding her sense of self until she believed she was the broken, unlovable person he described. Ethan felt a white-hot rage build in his chest. This man hadn't just kidnapped her. He had tried to erase her, to rewrite her into someone else, someone weak and dependent. The recording continued. Chloe recounted her escape. She had pretended to suffer from insomnia, and David had gotten her a prescription for powerful sleeping pills. For weeks she had palmed the pills, hiding them, until she had enough. One night she crushed them into his wine. After he passed out, she grabbed a small amount of cash from his wallet and ran. She ran for hours with no destination, just a desperate need to be free. She was afraid to go to the police, afraid this powerful, controlling man would find her and drag her back to her prison. After watching the recording, Ethan felt like he couldn't breathe. The monster who did this was still out there. He tried to think, his mind racing. Who would do this? Who could hate them that much? The police had no leads, just the description of a man named David, with no last name and no known address. Weeks turned into a month. Chloe slowly began to acclimate to her new old life. She was quiet and withdrawn, but moments with Lily brought flashes of light back into her eyes. Ethan tried to be patient, to be the kind, supportive man she needed, but inside he was screaming for the woman he had married, the vibrant soul trapped behind a wall of amnesia. One afternoon, hoping to jog her memory, Ethan pulled out their old high school yearbook. He sat with her on the couch, pointing out faces, telling her stories of their youth. "That's Sarah. She was obsessed with boy bands. And that's Mark. He once tried to dye his hair blue and it came out green." Chloe smiled faintly, a ghost of her old grin. He turned the page to the senior class photos. Her finger suddenly shot out, pressing down on one of the smiling faces, her whole body tensing. "Him!" she breathed, her voice tight with a terrifying recognition. "That's him!" Ethan's blood ran cold. He looked at the photo her finger was resting on. It was a handsome, confident young man with a familiar, arrogant smirk. The caption read, "Kyle Spencer." "That's not David," Ethan said, confused. "That's Kyle Spencer. He was in our class." Chloe shook her head, her eyes wide with a horrifying certainty. "He called himself David," she whispered, her voice trembling, with 5 years of suppressed fear and rage. "But that's him. That's the man who kept me." The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with sickening clarity. The high school rivalry, the bet, the fistfight, the way Kyle had stared at him that day with pure, unadulterated hatred. He remembered a bizarre encounter a year after Chloe's death. He had seen Kyle in a grocery store. Upon seeing Ethan, Kyle had turned pale, abandoned his cart full of groceries, including women's shampoo and face cream, and practically fled the building. At the time, Ethan had dismissed it as lingering animosity. Now, he saw it for what it was, the sheer panic of a kidnapper seeing the ghost of his crime walking towards him. Kyle hadn't just been a high school bully. He was an obsessed psychopath who had been playing the long game. Ethan immediately called the police detective on the case, his voice shaking with fury. "I know who did it," he said. "I know who took my wife." Within hours, police cars swarmed Kyle Spencer's secluded home in the suburbs. He didn't resist. The truth came out during the interrogation. It wasn't a random car accident. Kyle had been stalking Chloe for years. That day, he had followed her from her home. He'd intentionally clipped her car, sending her spinning off the road and into the river. He pulled her from the sinking vehicle, unconscious but alive. When she woke up in a private clinic he'd paid off, she had no memory. He saw his chance not just to avoid prison, but to finally have what he'd always wanted. He created a new identity for her, and a new life where he was her saviour and husband. The trial was a media circus. Kyle Spencer, the successful heir to a real estate fortune, was exposed as a delusional monster. He was sentenced to life in prison. But for Ethan and Chloe, the verdict was just the beginning of a much longer journey. The trauma of her ordeal kept Chloe's memories locked away. She knew Ethan was her husband, and Lily was her daughter, and she was growing to love them in a new way. But their shared past remained a story told by others. Ethan held on to hope, believing that one day his Chloe would fully return to him. One crisp autumn Sunday, they were walking through the Boston Public Garden as a family. They were laughing as Lily chased pigeons, and for a moment everything felt normal, almost like old times. Then Ethan froze, walking towards them on the path were his parents, Harrison and Eleanor Vance. He hadn't spoken to them in years, not since they had effectively disowned him for marrying Chloe. They looked older, more frail, and stopped short when they saw the family. "Ethan," his father said awkwardly. His mother's eyes were fixed on Chloe. "We heard the news," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "We are so deeply sorry for everything. May we meet our granddaughter?" Before Ethan could respond, a cool, clear voice cut through the air. It was Chloe's. "Your granddaughter," she said, a sharp, unfamiliar edge to her tone. "You mean the one you've ignored for 6 years? The one whose mother you called a gold-digging commoner from a family with no breeding?" Ethan stared at her, his heart pounding. He had never told her the specifics of that horrible dinner, shielding her from the painful details. How could she possibly know that? A slow, brilliant smile spread across Chloe's face, and her eyes, for the first time in 5 years, were crystal clear and filled with the fire he knew so well. "Chloe!" he whispered, hardly daring to believe. She turned to him, her smile widening as she saw the look on his face. "Of course I know," she said, her voice full of the old, familiar sarcasm. "I also remember our wedding anniversary is July 2nd, that you hate mushrooms, and that you snore when you're on your back. What, you think I'd forget you?" The wall had crumbled. The fog had lifted. She was back. His Chloe was back. Overwhelmed with a joy so intense it felt like it could burst his heart, Ethan let out a triumphant shout. He swept her up into his arms, spinning her around and around, laughing as Lily clapped her hands in delight. His parents watched, stunned into silence, as the man they had lost and the woman they had scorned were finally, truly reunited. In that moment, holding the woman he thought he'd lost forever, Ethan knew their nightmare was finally over. The love that had defied disapproving parents, a psychotic rival, and even death itself had won. They had a long road of healing ahead, but they would walk it together, a family reforged in the fires of an unimaginable trial. Their past was a map of scars, but their future was an open, sunlit path. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey of love, loss, and reunion. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more unforgettable tales, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is the strongest force in the world? Love or obsession?